All right, let's dive right into this explainer where we unravel one of the absolute most epic and frankly tragic tales in Indian history. We're exploring the life of Prithviraj Chauhan. Now, this is a legendary 12th century monarch whose story is practically etched into the soil of the Indian subcontinent. But look, this isn't just going to be a dry history lesson about dates and geography, not at all. It's a really profound narrative about honor, immense bravery, love, and ultimately, a betrayal that would quite literally alter the course of an entire civilization for centuries to come.
Think about this for a second. Why on earth would a victorious king forgive his greatest enemy 16 separate times? I mean, it sounds almost illogical, doesn't it? When your enemy is entirely disarmed and begging at your feet, is it an act of supreme greatness to let them walk away, or is it a catastrophic diplomatic blunder? Keep that question in mind, because it perfectly sets the stage for our story today, a legendary clash between unyielding chivalry and absolute deceit.
Section 1. The Fearless Young King. A prodigy is born. 11. Now that's not a tally of his victories. That is exactly how old he was when the entire weight of an empire fell onto his shoulders. Let's step back into the 12th century for a moment. This was a time when India was this incredible beacon of wealth, often called the Golden Bird, and it was filled with fiercely independent, powerful kingdoms. Right in the thick of it all was the Chauhan dynasty. Following the sudden death of his father, King Someshwar, an 11-year-old Prithviraj actually ascended the throne of Ajmer. Can you imagine being a kid surrounded by rebellious feudal lords and opportunists waiting for you to fail and having to step up to rule a vast kingdom? Well, supported by his mother, Queen Karpuri Devi, he didn't just survive the pressure, he thrived.
The thing is, he wasn't just some powerful, muscle-bound warrior. We're talking about a highly educated polymath here, someone whose legendary skills were obvious right from the get-go. His education went way beyond just swinging a sword. He mastered multiple languages, history, mathematics, medicine, philosophy, the whole shebang. In fact, our sources recount this jaw-dropping event from his youth where, while he was out hunting, a lion attacked him. Completely unarmed, this young king stood his ground, grabbed the lion, and literally tore its jaws apart with his bare hands. No, really. But maybe his most vital skill, and keep this in the back of your mind because it's going to be crucial later, was his mastery of Shabd Beti Bon. That's the incredibly rare ability to hit a target perfectly using nothing but the sound they make.
Section 2. Swayamvar and Rivalry, a bitter feud. So when you get that famous, that young, and you're ruling over Delhi and Ajmer, well, you're bound to make some powerful enemies. Enter Jai Chand of Kannauj. This created a really bitter contrast in the region. On one hand, you have the youthful, famous Prithviraj. On the other, the older, incredibly ambitious Jai Chand, a wealthy Gadavala king who believed he was the rightful, supreme emperor of northern India. Prithviraj, though, absolutely refused to accept Jai Chand's supremacy. He strictly followed the Rajput code that a sovereign king bows to no one. And you know how these things go, right? That political friction very quickly boiled over into a burning, deeply personal hatred.
What happens next is like something straight out of an epic movie. It transformed a political rivalry into a blood-soaked feud. Jai Chand organizes this massive ceremony to assert his dominance and deliberately doesn't invite Prithviraj. Just to rub salt in the wound, he places a clay statue of Prithviraj at the entrance, basically mocking him as a lowly doorkeeper. But here's the twist. Jai Chand's own daughter, Princess Sanyogita, had already fallen in love with the stories of Prithviraj's bravery. So during her Swayamvar, her husband-choosing ceremony, in front of all the assembled kings of India, she walks straight past all of them and puts her marital garland right onto that clay statue. In a flash, Prithviraj swoops in with just 100 fearless warriors, scoops up the princess, and fights his way out of Kannauj, leaving Jai Chand totally humiliated and raging for revenge.
Section 3. A clash of ideologies. Two different worlds.
Now, while all this internal, ego-driven drama was tearing India apart from the inside, a massive storm was brewing out west, coming from the rugged, unforgiving lands of Ghazni in modern-day Afghanistan. And this is a really crucial point to understand. This wasn't just a clash of armies. This was a brutal collision of two entirely incompatible worldviews about the rules of war. The Rajputs practiced something called Dharma Yuddha. To them, war was tightly bound by strict morality. You never strike a fleeing enemy. You never attack an unarmed man. And if your enemy surrenders, it is your absolute duty to forgive and protect them. But the invader, Shahabuddin Muhammad Ghori, he came from a harsh land where survival was the only law that mattered. For Ghori, war wasn't some gentleman's game. It was total warfare. He didn't care one bit about honor, he cared about winning, by sword, by poison, or by flat-out deception.
16 times. Let that sink in for a moment. Driven by his strict cultural ethics, Prithviraj defeated Muhammad Ghori and remarkably pardoned him 16 separate times when the invader begged for his life. Every single time Ghori attacked, the Rajput forces absolutely crushed him, and every time Ghori would fall to his knees, sometimes even putting grass in his mouth, which is a traditional sign of absolute submission, begging for mercy and swearing on his holy book that he would never ever return. Prithviraj, looking down at a terrified surrendered enemy, deemed him unworthy of his sword and just let him go. But Ghori? He wasn't feeling gratitude. He used every single defeat as a masterclass, studying the Rajput fighting styles and quietly plotting his revenge.
Which brings us to Section 4, the betrayal at Tarain, the 17th battle.
This extreme adherence to chivalry directly paved the way for the darkest chapter of our story, the Second Battle of Tarain in 1192. Ghori essentially weaponized Prithviraj's own morality against him. First, Ghori sends a message claiming he wants peace and is just waiting for orders to retreat. Trusting the word of a fellow ruler, the Rajput army relaxes. They take off their heavy armor and finally get some peaceful sleep. Then, at 4 a.m., thick fog rolling in, while the soldiers are bathing in the Saraswati River, offering their morning prayers with literally nothing but water and prayer beads in their hands, Ghori unleashes 10,000 mounted archers. It was an absolute massacre. Prithviraj rushed into the sheer chaos without his armor, trying desperately to save his men, fighting like a deity. But ultimately he was overwhelmed and captured.
Captured and dragged in heavy iron chains all the way to Afghanistan, the blinded emperor utterly refused to bow. He maintained the unyielding pride of a Rajput, even in total darkness. Brought into Ghori's court as a human trophy, covered in wounds, Prithviraj stood tall. When Ghori screamed at him to lower his eyes, Prithviraj roared back that a Rajput's eyes only bow before his deity, or close in death on the battlefield, never before a looter. In a fragile, ego-driven rage, Ghori ordered his guards to pierce the emperor's eyes with red-hot iron rods. The pain must have been unimaginably horrific, and yet the sources tell us the emperor didn't let out a single scream.
Section 5, the final arrow, a legend's revenge.
But listen, even in that lightless dungeon, thousands of miles from his homeland, this story was far from over. A reckoning was on the horizon. Prithviraj's childhood friend and court poet, Chand Bardai, actually traveled to Ghazni and cleverly tricked the arrogant sultan into testing a legendary skill. Disguised as a mystic, Chand Bardai poked right at Ghori's ego. He told him that even blind, the Rajput emperor was a master of Shabd-Bedi Ban and could strike a target just by hearing it. Now Ghori, thinking it would be a hilarious, humiliating joke to see a blind, helpless prisoner try to shoot a bow, actually went ahead and organized a massive public spectacle.
Now this is absolutely brilliant. Down in the arena, the blind Prithviraj stands with a bow. High up on his throne sits Ghori. The entire place falls dead silent, and Chand Bardai loudly recites a famous couplet. But this wasn't just poetry, it was basically a medieval GPS system, delivering the exact coordinates of the Sultan right to the blind king. He was telling Prithviraj, 4 bamboo lengths, 24 yards and 8 fingers up, that is exactly where the Sultan sits. Do not miss, Chauhan. In a fraction of a second, Prithviraj calculated the distance, the angle, and the height perfectly in his mind.
The exact second, Ghori shouted his approval, yelling shabash to command the shot. That was it. Riding purely on the sound waves of the Sultan's own voice, the arrow flew and pierced Ghori straight through the throat. He tumbled dead from his throne. Before the panicked guards could even process what a blind man had just managed to do, Prithviraj and Chand Bardai turned their daggers on each other. They made the ultimate sacrifice, ensuring that they died as free men, totally undefeated in spirit, right there on enemy soil.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a haunting question about the true cost of righteous warfare in a deceitful world. Prithviraj Chauhan lived by a code of honor that was absolute, unbending. But he fought an enemy who eagerly exploited that exact honor as a fatal weakness. It's a historical paradox that honestly still echoes today. Was it a supreme act of character and strength to forgive 16 times, or was it history's most devastating miscalculation of human nature? Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this incredible slice of history. I hope this story challenges how you think about leadership, about mercy, and ultimately, about survival.